like the animal kinship is obviously it's a huge field that you could really go into, and you could talk about a number of different animals that have had traditionally some sort of kinship relation with humans. In, for instance, in Northern Europe, ravens are particularly interesting because they are because raven is a trickster figure, and that is very closely aligned with what you see in specific Siberian cultures close to the Kola and Isle and close to Alaska, and down through the Pacific coast in America towards the northern part of the United States. So these people who live in that area, they typically have the idea that raven is a trickster, an ancestor, a shaman, and a totem. Shaman, totem. I think that was it. Now, the interesting thing is that if you look at North European tradition, you find that the raven god, which is called Odin, which is sometimes basically named the raven god, that he is a trickster, an ancestor, a shaman, and a totem relation in a similar way. So it's very closely aligned. It looks to me as if the raven motif, as you find it, for instance, in Scandinavia and England, is basically a part of a raven motif that you find around the northern hemisphere, basically around the Arctic rim. So you find it among Inuits, you find it among Native Americans, you find it among these Siberians, possibly in other groups. So this kinship between raven and human, that is sometimes visually imaged as a human face, for instance, that is inside perhaps, for instance, a raven mask. So if you have indigenous Americans of the Northwest Pacific coast, sometimes you'll have a raven dancer who's wearing a raven mask, and that can open this mask. It's a transformation mask, and it has a human face inside. Interestingly, you'll find the same motif in North European archaeology. You see raven-shaped brooches that has a human face inside. That symbolizes the entanglement. It's a very literal image of the connectivity between humanity and nature, a piece of nature, raven. So what I think has been the case in Northern Europe is that this is one totemic connection that has been there. It is historically very visible because it has been the totem relation of powerful groups, powerful families, royal families. So that means that you can read in chronicles about people who are carrying a flag with a raven on it in wars and these kind of things, which doesn't necessarily mean that the raven only means war. That's not necessarily just what it means. It just means that there's a group of people who are seeing their power in association with that particular being. Now, raven is also important because it is a trickster, and therefore there's a trickster voice in raven that some believe that we need today. We need some of that trickster genius in order to cope with the way that our, in a sense, very trickstery nature as humans have made an awful mess of things. We have messed up the entire world in our gluttony and our thoughtlessness. In a sense, we have acted in a way that's comparable to how raven acts in many American stories, and now we need the raven genius to get us out of this pickle that we're in again. So the raven has that trickster function in it. I seem to remember that there is a prophecy in relation with South America. You might even know what I'm talking about, relating to the condor and the eagle, where some shaman from, is it Peru or something like that, is talking about how the eagle represents a specific kind of power, and the condor has that a similar trickster-like role as you see in Raven. The thing is that they are, what's it called now? Birds that eat carrion. And that means that is part of their trickster nature, that they eat something that is inverted. It's disgusting for other people, right? Carrion, and it also makes them a symbol of the transgression of the barrier between life and death, where a bird like an eagle is much more a symbol of power. It's a bird of prey that descends in cinematically aesthetic violence and kills something and eats it, which is why, for instance, many empires and great nations who want to protect their power, they would typically choose eagles before they choose birds like crows and ravens as their crest, for instance, right? Which is an old tradition. The Romans had an eagle, had eagles on their standards. The Americans today still have that eagle standard, and they got that from the same part, or they got that from that tradition. So there's a tradition of imaging that bird in this way, and there's some sort of an interesting relation actually between eagle and raven. Also, when you look at the European tradition, that the raven is very much there. It's very visible in some of our source material, for instance, of the Viking Age, as this shamanic ancestor deity of specific powerful groups, and then the eagle is also there. But I was partly inspired by a couple of British scholars who basically suggested, I don't know if it's this whole naming our time as a something seen is getting a little bit too much these days, but they suggested to name our time the Raven Scene, that period where we need the voice of Raven to revalorize our relation with land.